what it is that draws Albertans to the charismatic political leader. Let's please give a wonderful, warm welcome, steelworker welcome to the Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley.
So, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. I understand people had a fairly good time last night. Some of you, without knowing it, parked outside my room for about half an hour. So I'm a little tired. Probably not as tired as whoever that was, but you know. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here this morning with you, and thank you, Ken, for that kind introduction. It is really very wonderful to be here today. As I look from the podium, I see proud members of an extraordinary union, a union that has been at the heart of Canadian life for more than 80 years, representing your members and fighting for working people fearlessly and unapologetically. So my deepest thanks go to Leo Gerard and to Ken Newman and to Steve Hunt and to Alain Coteau and to Marty Warren and to all the rest of the leaders and the activists here in this room. And I want to say thank you to all of you and everyone who made this conference possible. I love the atmosphere at these events. Wish I had more time to go to them than I do these days, but nonetheless I do, because there's a powerful realization of how much you can accomplish when you all work together. And together, the United Steelworkers have accomplished so much for working people. That important work continues right here at the National Policy Conference, a place where the seeds of fairness and justice for workers take root. And thanks to your members' leadership and hard work, those seeds bloom in workplaces all across this country. Because you've known, as I know, as we all know, all along, that there is no natural law pushing a more just and fair Canada forward. What there are, instead, is just only this: good women and good men who believe that things must change and are willing to fight for their beliefs. Many basic freedoms and protections that Canadian workers take for granted only came about, as you know, because the labour movement refused to give up and they kept fighting for a better country. On the 40-hour work week for health and safety, steelworkers were pioneers. And you always speak up when workplaces fall short of the highest standards. You've been leaders in fighting for women's equality and for minorities. And you continue to work relentlessly to end violence against women and to promote respect for human rights. And of course, in 1961, steelworkers were present at the creation of a progressive political organization that has spread across Canada up to and including, just recently, Alberta, sustained by the integrity and the decency of the men and the women who built the Canadian labour movement. So you have very, very much to be proud of. Steel members build and maintain the infrastructure that Canadians use every day while they advocate for their rights and their dignity. And you have all, in the past, now, and in the future, changed Canada for the better. And of course, today, the work of your union is even more important than it ever was before, and I'm reminded of that every day. So as Ken mentioned, in the last provincial election, as I've said before, we made a little bit of history. Albertans from all parts of the province and from all walks of life joined together to elect a new government and what I would suggest is a better government. You showed and we showed that we can elect a government that puts working people first, and that we can keep our province moving forward. And for the last 11 months, we have been delivering that change in Alberta. So, just a few things that we've managed to pull off in the last little bit. We've modernized and we have reformed our tax system to make it fairer for working families. We scrapped a regressive flat tax that promoted inequality throughout the province of Alberta, and now those at the top are paying just a bit more to help us through this tough time. We've taken big money out of politics to ensure that our democracy belongs to the citizens of our province. And we've stopped the Conservative government's reckless cuts to healthcare and education. Those cuts would have caused tremendous harm to patients, to students, and to working families who depend on vital public services. And we increased the minimum wage for hard-working Albertans, phasing out the discriminatory treatment of servers, who are mostly women, and setting out a path to raising the floor for all workers in Alberta to $15 an hour. And we took action to give basic human and employment rights to farm workers in Alberta. And I'll tell you, that wasn't easy. You may have heard. There was a good deal of strong opposition, but our caucus, and I was so proud of them, they did not waver, and they drew on the courage of their convictions to simply move ahead and do the right thing. And, you know, since this is a conference focused so clearly on equality and human rights, I would be remiss if I failed to mention our government's history-making record on inclusion. Electing the first 3 open members of the LGBTQ community in the history of Alberta. Appointing the first cabinet in Alberta, frankly, the first cabinet in Canada, in the history of Canada, where women make up the majority of that cabinet. Including 2 women who were pregnant, one of whom just gave birth to the first baby ever born to a woman elected in the legislature in the history of Alberta. And I'll let you in on a little secret. In the interest of maintaining equity, baby Patrick will be joined in August by a baby girl. So we'll have 2 babies around the cabinet table, which, let me just tell you, makes for a very different cabinet meeting. You have to really be very careful and confidential about the cabinet meetings, but suffice to say there's a lot of baby passing and a lot of bouncing during the cabinet meetings. It's really fun. Totally changes the way we work together. So we've done a lot in 11 months, but there is without question more to do, much, much more to do. Specifically, we need to address an issue that is critical to the entire Canadian economy and to every Canadian family. And that issue that I'd like to talk to you about today is the urgent need to open up new markets for our energy industry. And that's why I've come today to speak to members of my union at this National Convention of the United Steelworkers. Now, as you know, the oil price shock is having a profound impact on Alberta's economy. Almost 63,000 more Albertans are unemployed than just 1 year ago, and many more worry that they will be soon. And I see the effect of those job losses everywhere I go. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in northern Alberta and I had teachers and school board officials talk to me about the rising incidence of mental health concerns amongst their students. And they were talking to me about elementary school students. Students who were coming to school worried and anxious because one or both of their parents had lost their jobs. I heard from frontline social service providers about how people who had been food bank donors have now become food bank users. Behind every statistic about a job loss is a worker and a family and a community within which they live that is suffering. So we cannot fail to consider the realities of these challenges on people, because that's what we do as New Democrats. It's a very, very scary time for many Albertans. But the oil crash is not only an issue for Albertans. It is, in fact, an issue for every Canadian, no matter where they live. In British Columbia, for example, 40,000 workers support their families through work in Alberta's oil and gas sector. And they, too, are seeing their jobs disappear. This story is retold all across Canada, because the truth is, every Canadian depends on and benefits from a strong energy industry. And every school, every hospital, every road, every Canada pension check owes something to a strong energy industry in Alberta. People from every province work in Alberta's oil sands, and workers nationwide supply the energy sector with equipment and services, and steel. Moreover, Alberta's oil sands support billions of dollars in investment and trade, which translate into economic growth across our country. So let's be clear. The oil price crash is an urgent national economic issue. It is costing tens of thousands of jobs. It is taking billions of dollars out of Alberta's economy and everybody's economy. Over the last 2 years, we have seen the biggest decrease in capital investment in half a century, a decline of more than $50 billion. $50 billion less in capital spending in 1 year. When numbers get that big, it affects the whole country, and anybody who believes that it doesn't is fooling themselves. Now, as I've been often prone to say, we don't, and I don't, I really have to remind people this, I don't control the international price of oil. If we could, there wouldn't be a problem, but we don't. We can't. But what we can do is respond, control how we react to it. And there's a number of things that my government is doing, and in different forums I would talk more about that. We are very focused on diversifying our economy, and through that ensuring we become less and less dependent on the price of oil. But you can't diversify your economy overnight, and in the meantime you need to use the resources that you have to fund that diversification, to support that diversification. So what we can do is take steps to shape our own destiny by building a more diverse, more resilient, and more environmentally responsible energy sector. For too long, governments in Alberta and, quite frankly, Canada have taken the wrong approach on this issue. They imagined we could grow our energy industry by doing nothing, by pretending there was no issue to address, by denying that there were any concerns that needed to be tackled. Nothing to diversify, nothing, they didn't need to do anything around diversification. They didn't need to add value to our resources, and they didn't need to promote environmental responsibility. They didn't need to invest in renewables, and they didn't need to address growing concern about climate change. And that do-nothing approach got us nowhere. It only created divisiveness, anger, and overheated rhetoric across our country. And it hurt Alberta's reputation nationally and around the world. So that was bad for the Alberta's energy industry, and it was quite frankly bad for Alberta jobs and for those families that I was talking about. So our government acted. We put together an expert panel on the issue. We consulted widely with industry, with First Nations people, with environmental groups, and with communities. And we introduced last fall Alberta's Climate Leadership Plan, the single most important step any Canadian government at any level has taken so far to act on climate change. It is the cornerstone of our plan to build a greener, more efficient, more competitive, and more diversified economy. And we are implementing an economy-wide carbon levy. We are implementing a world-leading methane reduction plan, a plan that itself was the subject of conversation between our Prime Minister and the President of the United States just a few short weeks ago. We are investing in green infrastructure, and we are helping to grow renewables. So make no mistake that our climate leadership plan will erase any doubt about Alberta's environmental record. And at the same time, we are acting to add value and add jobs from our non-renewable resources. 2 months ago, we announced a petrochemical diversification program that will create thousands of good long-term family-supporting jobs while attracting investment in the upgrading of petrochemicals and the production of plastics. We have to do more of this, and we will. But there is still a big problem. If Alberta can't, we still only have one market at one discounted price for the oil that is now being produced or will be produced more responsibly, more carefully, with less carbon in the barrel. And that means that as bad as the oil price crash is for energy-producing jurisdictions around the world, it is even worse for Albertans and for Canadians. Think about it. Every time you hear on the news that oil has hit this or that new low on international markets, know that for Alberta and for Canada, that price is even lower. Historically, the long-term price differential between Brent crude and WTI means that Alberta and Canadians sell our oil at a 25% discount. And as a result, the price bust is amplified for Alberta energy producers, and billions of dollars are taken out of the Canadian economy. If Alberta can't get a good price for our oil, investment stops, and everyone stops earning money right through the value chain. And we go back to that $50 billion drop in capital investment. This simply has to change, not only for Albertans, but for all Canadians who depend on all that a strong energy industry brings. Fights over Alberta's environmental record are no longer valid. We have the best environmental and climate change policy of any energy-producing jurisdiction in the world. And that's why I've said time again, we need to recognize that Alberta has changed, and it's time to put the divisive battles of the past in the past. But in Alberta, we can't continue to support Canada's economy unless Canada supports us. And that means one thing: building a pipeline to Tidewater so that Albertans and Canadians get a fair world price for one of our country's most valuable commodities. And while we're at it, let's make sure that that pipeline is made from Canadian steel. Make no mistake, in Alberta and in Canada, we have the expertise, we have the skilled workforce, and we have the technology to build the safest pipelines in the world. And what we need now is for Canadians to stand with us to get this done. We need Canadians like you and in every part of the country to recognize that everybody loses if we fail to act. Now, there is progress to report. We now have a balanced framework to develop our industry. And every government in the country understands that the issue must be dealt with. So I come here today to the great city of Montreal, to the National Convention of one of Canada's most important national unions, to appeal for your support. I need you to think about the fact that Alberta has the most progressive environmental policies anywhere in North America. It's amazing. You couldn't have said that 11 months ago, but you can say it now. And I need you to think about the fact that we aren't getting fair value for our oil and the impact that that is having on our bottom line and the services that we rely on. And I need you to think about the tens of thousands of families who are hurting right now and need our support. And I need you to think about everything that a strong, environmentally responsible, progressive energy industry brings to workers and communities throughout Canada. So let's work together. Let's get to yes on a pipeline. It is critical to the future of our country and to the well-being of every Albertan and every Canadian. Friends, let me conclude by thanking you again for all the work that you do to help build a better Alberta and a better Canada, to foster a more equal, a more just, and a more prosperous country for the many, not just the few, and to create a shared community where everyone matters and everyone can contribute. So let's keep speaking out. Let's keep fighting for working people. Alberta needs you. Canada needs you. That's the only way we got to where we are today, and it is the only way that will make the future better. Thank you so much.
Rachel, thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. You're such an inspiration to all of us, and I'm just so pleased that you've been able to come back to, as I call it, to the steelworker family. You've got a lot of roots, and we just appreciate you taking your busy schedule to come and meet the delegates from all across Canada. I have a small gift of appreciation on behalf of our delegates, and again, thank you. But before you leave the stage, I want to call on Ray White, the president of Local 1-207, to make a presentation as well. Ray?
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Ken. Local 1207 took the liberty of framing Rachel's membership card. It's also framed with a Woman of Steel plaque, a Woman of Steel pin, and a Healthcare Workers Council pin. We want to thank Rachel for all the work that she's done for our local in the past, and we want to thank her for all of the work that she continues to do for Albertans across the province. Thank you, Rachel.
That's right. Well, thank you very much to all of you. I'm honored. This is beautiful, and I will make sure that it is hanging up in the office of the Premier in Edmonton.
Thanks. See you this weekend. Okay, brothers and sisters, what a perfect time to call up the Resolutions Committee and talk about some political action. Steve?
Morning, delegates. As the Resolution Committee comes up, please turn to your, this is on the table. It's a composite resolution. The first one we're going to get to is C11. And then we're going to go to G5 and B3, so you can line yourself up. So as the Resolution Committee settles, our first resolution is C11. It's a composite of resolutions A3 and C6. Yeah, in keeping with what Rachel just talked about, is high unemployment in Alberta and other places across the country, employment insurance reform. And on this one, I'll ask Ron Wyatt to read the resolution.
Resolution C11, employment insurance. Therefore, be it resolved that the